People say necessity is the mother of invention, but actually what I found is that divine inspiration is the actual key that unlocks the impossible. Sometimes I find it really hard to believe that this year I was issued my 200th patent, an accomplishment that makes me feel just so incredibly blessed. It's a testament that through the power of prayer, recognizing God as Lord and Creator, the power of persistence, and yeah, a lot of hard work. Patents on these and other inventions will ensure that LifeWave will only be growing bigger, stronger, and more influential for decades to come. As we continue to innovate and serve the needs of our customers, together we will be unstoppable. So, let's share the light and let's be the light.
Please welcome to the stage inventor, philanthropist, founder, and chairman of LifeWave, David Schmidt.
They wanted me to dance up here or something with that music. That will never happen. You know, when we were working with the events team for this conference, our team said, hey, how do you feel about if we have this round stage and we put you in the center of a giant patch surrounded by other patches? So I said, yeah, okay, sure, sounds good. But right now, oh, by the way, did you all have a great time last night with the Doobie Brothers? Awesome. Okay, well, no question you're all awake. What we're going to do now is we have a tremendous amount of information that we are going to cover today on anti-aging, age reversal, and exploring the limits of human lifespan. So let's go ahead and get into that now. So we want to know, what are the limits of human lifespan? There's a lot of ways to look at this, and there are many differing opinions in the scientific community. We're going to start at what might at first seem to be a little bit of an unusual place when we're talking about the subject of stopping aging and age reversal, and that is it possible to regrow a lost limb? As you're going to see, the two of these phenomena are intimately connected. They're actually different expressions of the same thing. So we're going to look at some work from Tufts University on the subject of the biodome. And what's so interesting about this is that this is, if you take a frog that does not have the ability to regrow a lost limb and you sever it, and then you're taking 5 biochemicals that act as signaling molecules, and you place this over the amputation site just for 24 to 48 hours. Within a period of anywhere from 9 to 18 months, after that initial signal, the limb will completely regrow or nearly regrow. So, what's important about this is that it just required the initial impulse of information, and then it required having the fuel to drive the regenerative process, the energy the amino acids, the protein synthesis. And this is something that LifeWave does extraordinarily well. Our patches are a communication system that feed the body with information. So this tells us that this type of technology is within reach, the ability to regrow lost limbs. So we have to wonder, how far away are we from being able to do this in human beings? So let's examine this a little bit further. Biodome was placed at the injury site for 24 hours after an 18-month process. So this is information transfer. In the case of these experiments at Tufts, this was all done through biochemistry, but ultimately we know that it's light that controls the biochemical reactions within the body. Light initiates these communications. The 18-month process was for regeneration. So this tells us that there is a limit at which new proteins can be synthesized. However, we've actually found in our experiments with a device called the double helix conductor that it's possible to overcome biological limitations on protein synthesis. But in any case, the important part of this is that regeneration requires energy. So you can think about this in your own life if you have an injury that has not healed. First, introduce the signal to initiate healing. And that can come from a variety of different means, the correct biochemistry or light, such as with our patches. And then you need the energy to drive the process. So this is where we have a healthy diet. You get your proper nutrition. You need enough protein in your diet to supply all of the raw materials that are required for regeneration. So when we're going to look at a very complex subject, such as human aging, we can distill this down into the principles of energy and information. So in everything that we're going to be covering today, I'd like you to keep this in mind. Keep coming back to this idea. If it seems too complicated, keep coming back to this idea that this is all being driven through energy and information. So why would aging be any different than this? If we provide the information and the energy to a biological system, we should be able to reverse human aging. And as you're going to see, this is absolutely possible. So one of the questions then is, if we know what it takes to drive mitochondrial energy, which is going to be the source of energy production in our cells, where do we get the information from to drive the regenerative process? So we're going to look at clues. And we're going to look at nature, and we're going to also look historically at human aging and see what we can find. And a place to start, interestingly enough, is story of the tree of life. So we look at this quote from Genesis 3:22. And as you know, the Bible was written in Hebrew, but we're looking at it in English right now, and it's important for us to have that frame of reference. So God says, okay, well, now that man has sinned, if he eats from the fruit of the tree of life, he'll live forever. So Adam lived 930 years. The question that we ask ourselves is this a real, factual account, a historical account? Is that a real number? Or is this just a story that was made up? Is there anything that we can point to, any information that would allow us to see, is this a real, true number? Because the implication is that if these ages that are recorded in the Bible are true and factual, it means that human beings have already lived to be more than 900 years old, and now this is a process of rediscovery. We have to understand how was that possible. So we're going to convert the English over to the original Hebrew and then use gematria to convert those letters back over into numbers. So if we take the phrase tree of life, depending on the calculator that we use, we come up with the number 66. What's interesting about this is that 66 is a harmonic of the number 528, if we think of this in musical terms. So, in other words, we're going to look at the number 66 as a frequency, and then we're going to double that frequency to get a harmonic, and we come up with 528. So we look in the literature, and interestingly enough, what we see is that a frequency of 528 hertz has been used to regenerate damaged DNA. So incredibly, embedded into the story of Genesis and the story of the tree of life is numerical information that tells us how to regenerate damaged DNA. There is no way that could have been known thousands of years ago, if we believe in the way history was telling us. But let's look at some clinical studies, because this is actually very interesting. We're in California. I thought some of the men here might be interested in knowing how do you elevate testosterone, right? It's not summer, but we are still in California. So there's not a local Radio Shack, I think, that's open anymore where you can go out and get a frequency generator. But you men, you might want to know 528 hertz elevates testosterone production. Pretty cool. So this is an example of how we're using energy to control the biochemistry of the body. Not necessary to get external injections of testosterone. Another example, if we use a different way to calculate the tree of life number, it comes up with 159. Now, in this example, what we're going to want to do is convert that over into a wavelength of light. And you can do this very simply with an online calculator. There's a very well-known formula for converting frequencies over into nanometers, and light is in the nanometer range. So in this particular case, we convert the tree of life frequency over into a wavelength of light, and we come up with 857 nanometers. Why is that significant? Well, research has shown in this band of light that this activates mitochondrial energy. And time again, what's been demonstrated in clinical studies is that one of the principal reasons why we age is because of a decline in mitochondrial function. In fact, when we restore mitochondrial function to a young, healthy state, we see the age of the cell become younger. So again, incredibly embedded into the Holy Bible, in the story of the tree of life, is frequency and light information that we can use to improve our quality of life by restoring mitochondrial function, and have a key in understanding how we can stop and reverse human aging. So, what can we take from all of this? All living systems depend on energy to survive. You stop energy production in a cell, and the cell dies, so this is known. All living systems depend on information. We're constantly collecting information in our environment, and we're responding to it. So our cells are constantly responding and adapting with this very complex communication system of information using light. Experiments demonstrated that it is possible to regenerate a lost limb in a species that doesn't have this capability simply by providing energy and information. And most importantly, when we're looking at quality of life and improving quality of life, experiments have shown that it is in fact possible to reverse the age of the cells using this biochemical information. And we see evidence that the information presented in the Holy Bible is in fact true. So this is exciting. So it means that the potential exists that human beings have already lived to be over 900 years old, and now we just have to rediscover how that could be possible. So next up, let's take a look at what the current limits of human lifespan are and what we can do about that. So let's go to the video.
If you look maybe 50 years from now or 100 years from now, a person born then, what do you think is a good goal in terms of how long a person would live?
Well, so it changes all the time because technology is changing so quickly. I keep revising the number upward. But I would say that if you do the right things during your life and start at an early age, let's say 25, we don't want malnutrition, starvation. That's not what I'm talking about. But in your 20s, start eating the kind of diets that I talked about, skipping meals. In animals, that gives you an extra 20 to 30%. We don't know if that's true for humans, and that would, even 5% more would be a big deal for the planet. I think that we should all aim to at least reach a century. I'm a little bit behind. I was born too early to benefit the most from all of this discovery. Those of you who are in your 20s, you should definitely aim to reach 100. I don't see why not. Consider this. This is really important. The average lifespan of a human that looks after themselves but doesn't pay attention is about 80. Okay, Japan, that's the average age for a male, a bit higher. If you do the right things in your life, which is eat healthy food, don't overeat, don't become obese, do a bit of exercise, get good sleep, and don't stress, that gives you on average 14 extra years. That gets you to 94. So getting to 100, if you just focus on what I'm talking about, it's not a big deal. Mm-hmm. So what's the maximum? Well, we know that one human made it to 122 and a number of them make it into their teens. I think that's also the next level of where we can get to with the types of technologies that I'm talking about. How long can we ultimately live? Well, there's no maximum limit to human lifespan. Why can a whale live 300 years, but we cannot? We're basically the same structure. We just need to learn from them. So anyone who says, oh, you max out at X, I think is full of it. There's nothing that I've seen that says biological organisms have to die. There are trees that live for thousands of years, and their biochemistry is pretty close to ours.
Okay. So there's many different views in the scientific community on limits of human lifespan. Dr. Sinclair is focused on this subject, and I'm happy to see that he believes that there are no limits of human lifespan, like many people in the anti-aging and age reversal community. But let's take a look at this a little bit deeper. Here's an article that's from Nature, a well-respected journal, and looking at the evidence for human lifespan. And in this article, the author states, well, we might expect that humans might live to be a maximum of 115 years old. Overall, that's pretty good, I think, for most people, but let's look at it a little bit differently. One of the things that's interesting about this is we've had people live to be over 120 years old. Now, I don't think most people want to live to be 120 and necessarily look like this. No offense to this young lady here. So the key is we don't want to be 120 or 150 or 200 and look that way. The premise behind this is that you're reversing the biological age of the cell. So there's no difference in appearance between a 25 or 30-year-old and someone that's 120 or 150 years old. That's the goal to shoot for. Many other scientists in the age reversal community believe that there's no upper limit to human lifespan, and it's more statistically, what are your odds over time of avoiding accidents, avoiding serious health problems, but we know that information is always doubling very, very quickly now. So if we live another 10 years, the information, the technology that we'll have access to is many times greater than where we are today. So what's the most optimistic view on human lifespan in the conventional scientific community and beyond? In age reversal community, they say it's about 1,000 years or so, which interestingly lines up with the numbers that we see in the book of Genesis. So what does science tell us about what we can expect in our lifetime now? There's some articles, again, out in Nature, which suggest that given current technology, they obviously don't know about LifeWave, they would put human lifespan somewhere around 100 years or so, which I don't think makes sense at all, given the pace of development. So we look to nature. In our labs, we study biomimetics. So this means we want to look to natural living systems for answers. Why try to invent a new technology when nature already provides us with a guide? We simply have to study species that defy normal human aging and then see what we can learn and then apply those principles over to human beings. So let's take a quick review of some species that age in a different way than human beings, or they don't age at all. We'll start with the bowhead whale. Longest living mammal, up to about 200 years of age, and they have a slower metabolism than human beings, and they live in very cold waters, so this is a contributor to their very long lifespan. Now we can go way over to the other side, and we look at the glass sponges with lifespans of 10,000 to 15,000 years. King's holly in Tasmania, 43,600 years. There's a single colony of Mediterranean seagrass, over 100,000 years old. So there are plenty of examples that we can study. You say, well, this is a plant. We can look at the species of bat, brant bat. They should only live to be 2 or 3 years old because their metabolism is so rapid. And when the metabolism is faster, that means you're producing much more oxidative stress, and the oxidative stress damages healthy cells. But interestingly, we can study the bat, and what we find is that they've developed a mechanism. They've been created with these remarkable biochemical systems that adapt to their stress so they can fly. And they can live to be 30 years of age. So this would be the equivalent to 180 years in human beings. So this means now we have a biological model that we can look at and mimic and create new technology and apply it to human beings. So what are some of the things that we see in bats? Well, they have exceptional control over the length of the telomeres, meaning that their cells can continue to divide without the telomeres shrinking. So this is a key factor in longevity. In addition, they have a mechanism by which their cells repair DNA. Now, we already know about biochemistry and energy medicine that will do the same thing. For example, if you keep your glutathione levels elevated, I'm not making a medical claim about our patches, saying if you happen to use a method like taking an N-acetylcysteine supplement for elevating your glutathione, studies have shown that elevated glutathione in the cell will repair damage to the DNA before the cell divides. And there are other mechanisms as well. So efficient DNA repair. Control of inflammation. Inflammation damages healthy cells, can cause breaks in the DNA, and bats have developed a mechanism to do that. So a method for human beings is controlling stress. If you happen to have a product or a technology that can control stress, then you might have a way to do this. I'm just saying. And then also, if we understand what is driving cancer, the standard definition, of course, is that a cancer-causing substance gets into the cell, mutates the stem cell, and then this replicates into a cancer cell. So, again, bats have developed mechanisms for dealing with this. But what about human beings? Keep this moving along. Now, let's again go back to the Bible for a moment, and we want to look to see, is there any evidence for these fantastic ages that are in the Bible? And I would encourage you to do this yourself, and you can use any various AI program to make this easy. ChatGPT, Grok 4, whichever one you care to, but make it very easy. So first, you can get a list of all the names that are mentioned in the book of Genesis, along with their corresponding ages, and then this is the list that you'll get. And you'll notice, of course, immediately a trend to where the age starts at 930 with Adam, and then goes down to 205. Now, we'll plot this on a graph. And you see right away that we have an outlier there in the data, with Enoch at 365 years old. Now, what does the Bible tell us about Enoch? It tells us that he never died, that God took him. So we remove Enoch from the data, and now we smooth out this curve because it's an outlier. So the next outlier that we want to look at is Noah. And the reason is because that's the point at which ages in the Bible start to decline. And we know that's when the flood occurred. So Noah and then his son Shem. Noah was 600 years old when he entered the ark before the flood. Shem was 98 years old. So Noah lived to be a total of 950, Shem 600. That's very interesting. So we might say, were the conditions that people lived in on the earth different before the flood than after a flood that attribute to this change in lifespan? We might be able to form any number of different theories or hypotheses about this, but it's worth reflecting and thinking about. In any case, we take these ages and we spread them out over time, and we can now ask AI, is this decline in aging statistically significant? Are these just random data points, or is this a statistically significant decay curve? And it turns out that these aren't random numbers at all, that this is a biological decay curve, meaning that we can rely on these ages in the Bible as being true and factual. So we know people lived to be over 900 years old before the flood. Now we just have to figure out why. So the short version of this is that there's evidence that the ages in the book of Genesis are true and factual. So people have already lived to be over 900 years old. So we can, if that's the case, then we can look at how to create technology to duplicate this. And we can look at further evidence. So let's go back now and see what's in the current scientific literature. Is there any evidence that humans can be regenerated to a more youthful state? So you can do the research yourself, or you can ask AI, depending on how you want to do this. So as it turns out, there are many things that we can do today that have an influence on our lifespan. One of them is fasting and calorie restriction. This is going to do two things. Number one, It's going to help clear out zombie cells from the body. And it's also going to reduce the amount of oxidative and inflammatory stress that we experience. So calorie restriction and fasting are known to be methods that we can use to increase our health span and our lifespan. Exercise. Exercise is perhaps one of the most reliable ways of improving longevity. We know that most people, when they get to age 70, they experience sarcopenia, muscle wasting, and because they haven't committed to a life of exercise, that means now also their bone density is going to decrease and make them more susceptible to injury that they may not recover from. In addition, studies have shown that we can use very specific methods of cardiovascular training, which I'm going to teach you during the course of the next 2 days. 80 seconds of the correct type of cardio training per week is enough to cause regeneration in the human heart. And if there's anyone here that can't exercise for 80 seconds a week, I invite you to leave now. But please stay. Okay. Another method that's incredibly simple. This was discovered by Dr. Bruce Ames on the combination of acetyl L-carnitine and alpha-lipoic acid. This combination, both in vitro and in human beings, has shown to boost mitochondrial function and in turn cause older cells to look and function like younger, healthier cells. Oxytocin, the hormone of love. We speak about this frequently at LifeWave, that if we can elevate our oxytocin levels, we can regenerate the muscle tissue in the body back to a younger, healthier state.
Yeah.
I'll go for that. So we simply adopt an attitude of love and kindness towards others. This has the benefit that we reduce stress on our system. And doesn't matter if you're 70, 80 years old and above, elevating oxytocin causes those older muscle cells to regenerate to younger, healthier cells. Copper peptide. Copper peptide will reset 1/3 of the human genome back to a younger, healthier state. So we very clearly have evidence that age reversal, again, is possible with a simple peptide. Carnosine. So supplementation with carnosine or beta-alanine, which is the precursor to carnosine, in studies going back 20 years, has shown that this will help to protect the telomeres from degradation. And in experiments with mammals, with mice and rats, there have been 30 to 40% increases in human lifespan. In lifespan in mammals, in those rodents. So now we can see that we have multiple methods that we can employ on a daily basis that are very simple, that will have a practical impact on our age. Glutathione. Consistently in human beings that live to be over the age of 100, one thing that they all have in common is their glutathione levels, and it's very understandable why. Glutathione is the body's master antioxidant. It protects the cells from oxidative inflammatory stress and helps to repair damage to DNA. So for example, you go out in the sun, you get too much exposure to the sun, and you get breaks in the DNA. Glutathione will regenerate and repair the DNA before the cell divides, not passing that mutation on to a future cell. This is very well known in the literature. And restoring NAD. So a lot of the work that's being done today on age reversal is looking at precursors to NAD, such as NMN and NR, and even niacin, just regular basic vitamin B3 niacin is a precursor to NAD and can help support your NAD levels. We found in our studies with X2O that the X2O water will initiate increases in NAD levels. More on that later. So what can we take from all of this? Well, in the scientific community, some of the consensus is that human lifespan is limited to 120 years. But also, there are scientists that think that there is no upper limit to human lifespan, or maybe that will peak out around 1,000 years. There's species on this planet that defy normal aging, so we can use this information and we can use these species as a biological model for applying what we learn over to human beings. There's evidence that the ages in the Bible are true and factual. There's scientific evidence that it's possible to reverse the age of human cells. So, up next, we're going to talk about LifeWave and lifespan. But first, let's go to this video.
I simply define aging as the lifelong accumulation of damage in the body that is generated as side effects of the normal metabolic processes that keep us alive from one day to the next. The analogy with a car or an aeroplane or any other man-made machine is absolutely valid. They do damage to themselves in the course of their normal operation, and they're only set up to tolerate a certain amount of that damage. But, as you say, by sufficiently comprehensive preventative maintenance, we can keep a car going as long as we like, irrespective of how long it was designed to last. People cling to this completely fallacious idea that there is some kind of biologically meaningful difference between the diseases of aging on one side and aging itself on the other side. There is no such thing. Everything that predominantly goes wrong with people late in life and not early in life is part of aging, whether we call it a disease or not.
How does this play out? Like, what should people be ready for?
It's a very, very important question, and I believe that actually the next few years, the next 3 to 5 years, are going to be the critical ones, because that's the period during which this already increasing, burgeoning understanding of the imminence of these technologies is going to really take off and become general. Most people will realize that these therapies are probably coming soon, probably in time for them. And that's the point when they're going to make changes to their lives as a result of expecting to live a lot longer than they previously expected to live. We have to really urgently develop new products that will be ready to roll out when this change in people's expectations of how long they're going to live starts to happen. Because when it does start to happen, it's going to spread like wildfire.
Okay, so let's take a look at LifeWave and lifespan and some of the things that you can be implementing to have an impact today on your overall quality of life. So the goal here is that not only do we want to increase lifespan, but we want to increase health span, meaning that as you age, you stay younger in the process, and we even reverse some of the signs and symptoms of aging. If we can do this, then that means we decrease our risk of all-cause mortality. So, for example, if we implement a regular program of eating healthy and exercise, and we maintain a healthy body composition, and we stay strong, then what we do is we reduce our risk of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer, just to name a few. So these are really important things that will have an impact on quality of life, not just that we're trying to extend life, we're trying to extend the amount of time that we can have productive, youthful years. So let's look on some research of some specific nutrients, for example, that you could include. So notably, the body's levels of glutathione decline with age. And for all the reasons already mentioned, glutathione as the master antioxidant is going to be a key strategy in extending human life and maintaining health. Glutathione also, of course, is principal antioxidant in the liver, which facilitates detoxification. So in a world that we live in today, which is full of contaminants, we need to maintain our body's levels of glutathione because it is the backbone of our defensive system. So of course, we have two products that will help support your body's levels of glutathione. One is the glutathione patch, and the other is Cellurgize, which contains the precursors that your body needs to make glutathione. And there are a number of studies that we have in our back office that demonstrate how this patch elevates glutathione. Depending on what your diet is like and what you do with supplementation will depend on your ability to make glutathione. So for example, if you are a vegan or a vegetarian, you may not be getting enough of the amino acid cysteine in your diet or the mineral selenium, which is a necessary precursor for making glutathione. So that's why we included N-acetylcysteine in Cellurgize and selenium so you could get those nutrients. Now carnosine is a nutrient that everyone should be taking or elevating because it has enormous health benefits. First, as we've already discussed, carnosine protects the telomeres, and this is going to protect our ability to make new cells. So we consider this. When we get into our mid-70s, our cells reach what's called the Hayflick limit. The number of times the cells can divide are defined by this limit. And in humans, it's about 70 to 75. So at that point, we're no longer making younger, healthier cells. The telomeres, since they're regulating cell division, if we can simply use methods to lengthen the telomeres or prevent them from decaying, which happens in all species that don't age, then we can continue to make younger, healthier cells way beyond the limit of 75. In addition, carnosine is stored in the brain and in the muscle tissue. So our research with carnosine demonstrates that in addition to improving cognition, also improves strength and stamina. So when we consider all-cause mortality in individuals above the ages of 50, 60, 70, one of the key things that we see is that this is closely linked to strength and stamina. Meaning if you're exercising, if you're using nutrients like carnosine to maintain strength, your risk of dying from anything declines. Now, one of the key factors in aging is stress. So if we live a life where we work long hours, we're not taking methods to manage stress, we have stress in our personal life, we have stress at work, we're not taking time to exercise, meditate, pray, then this will ultimately cause a health crisis in our life. Emotional stress is linked to oxidative and inflammatory stress. So when we have these negative emotions, it has a detrimental physical impact on the body. It's important to recognize that. So Eon, what we have found, within about 15 seconds, reduces the stress on the nervous system. We did this study. One of the important studies that we did with Eon was with Dr. Tom Budzinski, and we used a piece of technology that's called thought technology, and it measures changes in the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. And what we found is that within 15 seconds of applying the Eon patch, the nervous system goes into balance. So that's why we market this as a product for managing stress. Now here's a fun fact. Very often I'll be asked, well, we know the glutathione patch elevates glutathione. We know X39 elevates copper peptide. Why don't we show what peptide Eon will elevate? And the reason why we don't talk about that is because if you were to do a search on that peptide, you would immediately see medical applications for that peptide, and we don't want to make those claims for this patch since we don't study it that way. But the Eon patch was developed as a result of research that was done, interestingly enough, on bees. So if you take a peptide that naturally occurs in the human body, in the liver, and this peptide declines with age, and you take that peptide and you inject it into a worker bee, you can increase the lifespan of the worker bee to be equivalent to a queen bee. And turns out that the queen bee, the reason why they live longer is because they're eating the royal jelly, and that peptide is found in the royal jelly. So this is a very good example of how we can look to nature and find clues to how different species are defying normal aging and then apply that over to human beings. So use of the Eon patch elevates this peptide. It will reduce stress on your nervous system, reduce inflammatory oxidative stress, and we certainly believe this will ultimately have very beneficial impact on longevity. Now, copper peptide. We don't have enough time today to cover all the benefits of X39 and copper peptide, but a simple search will reveal that there are numerous benefits to using X39 and elevating your copper peptide. We know that copper peptide levels decline by over 60% after the age of 60. So we have to have a strategy if we want to improve our longevity. We have to have a strategy for increasing our body's levels of copper peptide. Again, with Cellurgize, we include the nutrients that are required to make copper peptide, just in case you don't have the best diet. So some of the benefits are cosmetic in the sense that we're repairing the skin. But keep in mind that collagen is the #1 protein in the body. So if we're seeing these effects show up in the skin, we know that they're also occurring throughout the body, improving skin firmness, elasticity, reduction of fine lines and wrinkles, even improving the structure of aged skin. This is an important one because when we do research on human aging, one of the key things that you see is that the physical structure of the cell changes over time. The cell has what's called a cytoskeleton, which is made of a matrix of collagen protein. So it's like jello inside the cell. And the organelles are attached to this collagen matrix. When we're age 25, levels of collagen begin to drop. So we could say, in effect, that around age 25, we start to age. So we need to have methods of increasing collagen production and maintaining the integrity of the cell, and copper peptide is one of the methods that we can use for that. Another interesting effect of copper peptide is reducing photo damage. I would encourage all of you to make sure you're getting enough copper in your diet. In physics, we would create a Faraday cage to screen out electromagnetic radiation. And these Faraday cages are made of copper. Well, it turns out the same thing happens in human beings. the skin stores copper. And if we get enough copper in our diet, it can help to act like a Faraday cage and screen out harmful UV light. So this is something that we should be doing, getting enough copper in our diet to protect us from unwanted exposure to UV. And of course, copper peptide improves overall skin appearance, protection from UV radiation. Copper peptide manages inflammation in the body, and of course, other things that we can't talk about. And you're not talking about either on these conference calls, right? All right. And of course, the big one relative to our conversation today is that copper peptide, which was discovered by Laurent Picard. I hope he wins a Nobel Prize for his discovery, 50 years doing research in this area. And he found that copper peptide resets 1/3 of the human genome back to a more youthful state. So this is really key. There's a phenomena called parabiosis. And this was discovered more than 150 years ago. And essentially it was found that if you take the blood from a young animal, like a rat, and you put that into an older rat, that the older rat starts to become younger. And the same effect occurs in human beings. And one of the principal factors that's driving that process is copper peptide. So again, we can look to nature. And we've done numerous studies on X39 now. So very, very early on in 2018, we had developed protocols working with a lab on how to measure GHK and GHK-Cu levels in human beings. And so we did our initial pilot studies, and we found that application of X39 did in fact elevate levels of GHK within 24 hours and levels of copper peptide within 7 days. So the copper peptide is formed first, and then very quickly it binds with copper. And by the way, both GHK and GHK-Cu are biologically active, meaning there's beneficial effects from both of those peptides. So this is why when people start to use X39, they find within the first day that they're already sleeping better, they have improved energy and other effects. So, and then I click past that other slide a little bit too quickly, but of course you can get this in your back office. That was an initial pilot study, but then we did a double-blind placebo-controlled study, and we found the same thing, that X39 is indeed elevating copper peptide. Okay, oh, and there it is back up over there. Thank you, kind person, in audio video. So these studies are available in your back office. We don't need to go through them now, but this is just to say that we're doing the research studies on our products in this field of anti-aging and age reversal. So first, you can have the confidence in knowing that this is a science-based company. We support our products with proper research, but also we're on the cutting edge of looking at what is possible in stopping and reversing human aging. And there's a lot more to the story, but we're going to watch this video and then come back.
You know, we all kind of lose function in our bodies as we get older, right? Like the big things that, if you look at the biggest killers, it's like heart disease, cancer, diabetes. So a lot of medicine is targeting how do you treat that disease. But there's another theory, which is like maybe the root cause of all those things is that, you know, our cells are just losing function as we get older, and so you're more susceptible to get these diseases. Like, I'll give you an example. So if you're like, let's say you're in your 20s or 30s, and you know, you have some damage to your cells, like you drink too much, or you get sick, or like, you know, and there's a kind of like this insult or damage to your cells. Your cells have the ability to recover from that. when you get older, your cells don't really have the ability to respond as well to these kinds of threats, or like, it could be viruses, or, eating or drinking too much, or not getting enough sleep or whatever. They start to lose their function. And so instead of treating like the effects of these diseases, why don't we just try to restore the function your cells had when you were younger? Because like, who wouldn't want to feel like you had the metabolism or immune system or whatever, or the muscle system of like a younger person, right? Mm-hmm. That would just be more years of healthy life, to get stuff done. So anyway, I think we're on the cusp of potentially being able to make a breakthrough in this area. And it's high risk, but I think this is exactly what people should be doing. Like if you have some success in business, like try to push the frontier, right? Do something that's really challenging. What we're trying to do is not change the type of the cell. We're trying to just change the functional age of the cell. Like if it starts as a skin cell, stay as a skin cell, but just be like a younger version of yourself. And so we're searching the vast space of different sets of proteins. They're called transcription factors, which basically turn on and off different genes in the cell. There's like a massive number of combinations of these that are potential. We've developed a high throughput screening system that can test like millions of hypotheses, looking for novel sets of proteins you can put in these cells that change the state of it back to like a younger cell. And we know that.
So you're injecting proteins, and
yeah,
it would be an injection of proteins into the body that the cells absorb.
Yeah, and they're delivered via this thing called lipid nanoparticles. But yeah. It's basically a way to deliver proteins into these cells, and it causes them to turn on and off different genes.
Wow.
Yeah.
How far out do you think you are?
We're going to start clinical trials on our first program probably in the next year or two in humans. And that's where you have to go through FDA or different countries you can do it in. And then we have 2 or 3 other programs coming along. So I think within like 5 to 10 years, we'll hopefully have candidates ready for, potentially someone could actually go get it prescribed by their doctor in like, hopefully like less than 10 years. But, these are kinds of things that sometimes you need to try a lot of shots on goal to get something that works, mm-hmm. right? And it can start to get expensive the later you are down doing these human trials. Like it costs something like $2 billion and takes about 10 years to get a drug to market. And that's with a lot of failures along the way. So, we're putting a lot of capital to see if we can come up with a breakthrough here.
Who wants to be part of that, right? Any way to make us look younger and feel younger, right? Well, thank you so much, David. We're going to be hearing from him in just a few minutes. But our next speaker is Dr. Gitte Jensen, a hands-on scientist with more than 35 years of experience in biological sciences and natural products research. As research director at NIS Labs, she helps design research that's not only ethical and effective, but truly meaningful. While she couldn't be here with us in person today, she has recorded a special presentation just for this audience. Let's take a look.
Hi, my name is Gitte Jensen, and I'm the research director at NIS Labs. We have conducted clinical research on the LifeWave X39 patch, and I'm speaking to you today to present our results. My background is in immunology. I have a PhD from University of Aarhus in Denmark. I went on to work as a postdoc in cancer biology at University of Alberta in Canada. And I became an assistant professor at McGill University, studying systems biology involving both immune cells and stem cells. And I'm the founder and the research director at NIS Labs. I have worked with research on natural products for over 30 years. We use mainstream tools to ask questions about unusual methods for supporting health. My passion is to find truth in ancient traditional healing methods and to help talk about them in words that modern science can embrace. To do this, I founded our lab, NIS Labs. At NIS Labs, we study the mechanisms that allow our immune cells to travel around in our body to protect everything. Here's a drawing of some sleepy cells, both inside the blood vessel and in the tissue. There are some NK cells and some B cells, some T cells, and some macrophages. This sleepy picture can change pretty rapidly. X39 helps the immune system to be alert and happy. We want the cells moving to protect our entire body in the blood, the skin, the gut, and all parts of us. and we want the cells to communicate. We also study the processes inside ourselves of making cellular energy. Our health is not a simple on-off switch. We know that our overall health is a result of endless interconnected processes, starting with cellular energy, supporting our immune system's alertness, communicating in the body with nerves and chemical messengers, and then a feedback loop with anti-inflammatory effects. Based on how complex our body is, I was very excited when I learned about the X39 patch, a tiny little thing that makes light, not just on its own, but only when it's applied to the skin. When you look at the patch, you don't see the light. I knew we had to study this. We conducted a clinical trial to document what happens within the first few hours after you put on an X39 patch on the back of your neck. The results were very clear, and these results is what I will be presenting to you today. First, I want to tell you about how we did this study, where each person served as their own control. Each study participant came for 2 clinic visits and used the X39 patch on one visit and a placebo patch on another visit. We took blood samples immediately before applying a patch and then at 1 and 2 hours later. People were sitting quietly and resting and doing it in the same way, both on the X39 day and the placebo day, and they rested calmly in a quiet room between the blood draws. Now, the placebo patch looked exactly like the X39 patch, but did not contain the things that make light when it is applied to the skin. And the study was randomized. This means that different participants used the X39 patch on the first visit and placebo on the second visit, and other participants used the placebo on the first visit. The X39 patch and the placebo patch had 2 different numbers written on the back, but neither the participants nor the clinic staff knew which patch was which. Now, while we know that we can measure changes in the blood after consuming natural products, we were not sure what was going to happen when we applied the X39 patch to the skin. We hoped to see some changes, and we expected that they would be mild. Our results were amazing. We had 2 surprises, one that had to do with cellular energy and another that had to do with reduced inflammation. Before I tell you more about these findings, I need to introduce you to those 2 topics. Let's talk about energy first. In order to talk about the ways we documented changes in cellular energy in the X39 study, let's look at the parts inside each of our cells that make energy, the mitochondria. Inside every cell in our body, we have bubbles, tiny little bubbles that are called mitochondria. This is where energy is being made. They are literally the powerhouses of our providing energy for our entire body. The mitochondria have a unique machinery inside, similar to a conveyor belt, that's called the electron transport chain. So that electricity that is being transported is where I have these little lightning bolts on this drawing. They use this electron transport, they use this to supercharge energy into molecules called ATP. So the mitochondria are subcellular energy factories. The ATP is loaded with energy that can be sent out into the body and give energy to our muscles, our brain, and everything else that burns energy for our body to function. So as part of the X39 study, on all clinic visits, we took the blood samples into the laboratory and we studied the mitochondria. And already after 1 hour of wearing an X39 patch, the mitochondria were larger than 1 hour after wearing a placebo patch. This process of getting larger mitochondria is called mitochondrial biogenesis, and we know it can happen within hours after consuming certain nutraceutical supplements. However, we had no idea that this type of change happens and can be measured in the blood 1 hour after putting on an X39 patch. And how it happens, we don't fully understand yet, since we don't fully understand the code for how our cells communicate with light inside the body. Now let's talk about inflammation. Inflammation is related to aging and accelerates aging, and the loss of cellular energy also accelerates aging. Also, in terms of regulating inflammation, the X39 patch worked quickly. The anti-inflammatory marker IL-1RA increased rapidly and was increased at 1 hour, and the pro-inflammatory cytokine IL-8 decreased. This change was rapid, creating a boost of cellular communication that helped regulate inflammation. This wave of cellular communication also involved reduced levels of C-reactive protein, another inflammatory blood marker. After that initial boost of anti-inflammatory activity at 1 hour, we observed that at 2 hours the levels of C-reactive protein were reduced. So it seems that applying the X39 patch to the skin initiates measurable changes that spreads throughout our whole body. It's like adding a drop of water into a silent lake, and the drop starts ripples, and the ripples expand outward. And it starts waves of orchestrated changes in the body involving rapid increase in energy and rapid regulation of inflammation. Now let's shift gears a little. There was a second part to this clinical trial. After the first part of the clinical trial was done, all the participants then used the X39 patch every day for 4 weeks. And this part of the clinical trial allowed us to see what happened with daily use over time. We studied the blood cells after 1 day and 1 week and 4 weeks. And this further helped solidify that applying an X39 patch has effects that we can quantify and that we can discuss scientifically. And the X39 patch works long term. Already after 1 day of using X39, the cells were able to maintain a higher energy production under stress. The small umbrellas here and here over each mitochondria show that they're protected from stress. The green circles show that the size of the mitochondria is protected under stress, and the purple lightning bolts illustrate that the electrical charge inside the mitochondria are protected under stress. The mitochondria can continue to make more energy and more ATP. We tested many other blood markers in all the blood samples in the X39 study, and we saw additional evidence of ongoing changes and adaptation when using the X39 patch. Examples include the anti-inflammatory marker IL-1RA that was increased at 1 week, and the pro-inflammatory markers IL-8 and TNF-alpha were decreased at 1 day and 4 weeks. So when the X39 patch is used daily, the body experiences daily waves of adjustment to cellular energy, cellular resilience, and reduced inflammation. Every time a new X39 patch is applied, a fresh wave of adaptation and boost of energy happens. Now, as I'm winding down my presentation, a reminder to all of us. For us to age gracefully in good health, we need to tend to our body like a garden. We need to clean up the dead leaves, tend to the flowers, keep the soil hydrated and nutrient rich. The use of the X39 patch generated results showing orchestrated waves of events, starting with mitochondrial biogenesis and continuing with increased mitochondrial membrane potential, anti-inflammatory markers, reduced pro-inflammatory biomarkers, and an increase in energy. I thank you for the opportunity to share with you our scientific results from the clinical trial on wearing the X39 patch. And congratulations to David Schmidt and the LifeWave team for your contributions to natural and gentle support of health and wellness. Thank you.